Yeah, I won. I won. I won. I won. Those four words, simple as they are, somehow captured everything that happened at the Qatar Open in Doha. Because what AlexEala did there wasn't just winning a first-round match, it was something much bigger than tennis. It was a moment that made the entire sport stop and take notice. If you're new here and you care about tennis, about where the sport is going, and about the kind of stories that don't get told often enough, then subscribe right now and hit the bell, because this channel covers the real conversations happening in women's tennis. Not just the scores, not just the rankings, but the stuff that actually matters. You won't want to miss what's coming. Now let's get into it. AlexEala, a 20-year-old from the Philippines ranked outside the top 100, walked onto the court at the Khalifa International Stadium in Doha for a first-round match against Teresa Valentova from the Czech Republic. That sentence alone should tell you this was supposed to be a quiet, forgettable early-round match, the kind that fills the schedule but doesn't fill the stands. Instead, the entire stadium was sold out, every single seat, gone within minutes of the schedule being released. Scalpers showed up, which is something that almost never happens for a first-round match at any tournament, let alone for a player who has never won a WTA title. Security had to be increased around the player entrance because the crowd waiting outside was too large to manage safely. And inside that stadium, 7,000 Filipino fans turned a Tuesday afternoon tennis match into something that looked and sounded more like a World Cup football game. To understand why this is so remarkable, you have to know what the Qatar Open normally looks like in the early rounds. This is a WTA 1000 event, one of the biggest tournaments on the tour outside of the Grand Slams. It has hosted legends. Serena Williams played here. Maria Sharapova played here, Justine Henin, Iga Świątek, Aryna Sabalenka, all of them have been at this tournament. And the early rounds at events like this are usually quiet, polite applause, maybe 30 or 40% of seats filled, the sun baking the empty plastic chairs while top seeds work through their opening matches without much fanfare. That's not a criticism, that's just how it works. Early rounds fund the tournament but don't drive ticket sales. The big crowds come for the quarterfinals, the semis, the final. That's the model. It's been that way for decades. AlexEala broke that model completely. The tournament organizers looked at their draw, which included multiple Grand Slam champions and top 10 players in the world, and they made a decision. They designated Eala as the main attraction. They put her match in the prime slot. They built their promotional energy around her. Think about what that actually means. These are experienced professionals who run major sporting events for a living. They looked at players who had won majors, been ranked #1 in the world, accumulated years of elite results, and they said no. The 20-year-old Filipino who has never won a WTA title is our headline act. That is an extraordinary statement about star power, and it turned out to be completely correct. The stadium didn't just fill up, it transformed. Flags were everywhere, Filipino flags, handmade banners, signs with Eala's name written in Tagalog. The chanting started before the players even walked out and didn't stop until the last point was played. The noise inside that venue reached levels that people are comparing to Davis Cup or Billie Jean King Cup matches, which are team competitions specifically designed to generate nationalistic, passionate atmospheres. This was an individual tournament match, one player representing herself, not a country, not a team, not a flag. And yet the atmosphere was more intense than most team events get to experience. That is genuinely unprecedented in modern women's tennis. The reason it happened is not complicated, but it is often overlooked by the people who run the sport. Qatar has a massive Filipino expatriate community. Hundreds of thousands of Filipinos live and work there, many of them overseas workers who send money back home to their families, sacrificing years of their lives away from the people they love in order to build something better. For a long time, they watched sports and cheered from the outside. They had Manny Pacquiao in boxing, a global icon who made them feel seen on the world stage. But in tennis, a sport that has historically been dominated by European and American players, they had nobody to cheer for. Not until Eala. When the Qatar Open schedule was announced and Filipinos in Doha saw that Eala was playing, the mobilization was immediate. It didn't come from a marketing campaign or corporate sponsorship. It came from group chats, social media posts, community networks, and word of mouth spreading at the speed that only genuine passion can travel. People bought tickets, arranged time off work, organized transport, and showed up in force. 7,000 of them, all there for one player. Now let's contrast that with what was happening in other parts of the same tournament at the same time. Reports from inside the venue confirmed that matches featuring top seeds in similar time slots were drawing crowds of maybe 30 to 40% capacity. Aryna Sabalenka, a Grand Slam champion and former world #1, played to a half-empty stadium. Iga Świątek's early matches had plenty of available seats. These are the players who, by every traditional measure, should be the biggest draws at any tournament anywhere in the world. They have the titles, the rankings, the years of dominance, and they couldn't come close to generating what Eala generated without even trying. That has to be a strange thing to sit with if you're one of those top players. You've spent years at the top of your sport, you've done everything right, and then you look across the complex and see a 20-year-old Filipino who's never won a WTA title playing to a packed stadium while you're warming up in front of a crowd that's barely there. The envy is real, and honestly, it's understandable, because what this moment exposed is something that makes a lot of established players deeply uncomfortable. Star power in tennis is not the same as ranking or results. It never has been, but the sport has been operating as if those things were identical for a long time. Eala's match in Doha proved that connection matters more than accomplishments when it comes to filling seats and creating atmosphere. The Filipino fans are not there because Eala has the best backhand on tour or because she's won the most matches this season. They're there because she represents them. She looks like them, speaks like them, carries their story onto a stage that has almost never had someone like her standing on it. That kind of connection cannot be manufactured. It can't be bought with prize money or built through years of winning. It exists because of who you are, where you come from, and what your success means to a community that has been waiting for exactly this moment. The match itself was its own kind of story. Valentova is not an easy opponent. She is a powerful Czech player with a big serve and heavy ground strokes, and she came into the match with a head-to-head lead over Eala. She had beaten her before. She knew what to expect, and she had the experience of a seasoned professional who knows how to shut out noise and play her game regardless of the crowd. The statistical picture wasn't particularly favorable for Eala either. She had struggled against Czech players more broadly and was stepping onto the court carrying the weight of 7,000 people who had paid hard-earned money and rearranged their schedules to watch her win. That's a very particular kind of pressure that most athletes never have to face. It's different from playing in a big crowd that's neutral. It's different from playing in a Grand Slam final. When the crowd is specifically there for you, when every single person in the stadium is desperate for you to succeed, the emotional weight can become crushing. The tendency is to overhit, to go for too much on every shot, to try to give the crowd the spectacular moments they came for, instead of playing the patient, consistent tennis that actually wins matches. Eala has described in interviews before how managing crowd energy is one of the most difficult skills to develop, and this match was the ultimate test of that.
The courts in Doha are medium-slow hard courts with a gritty surface that takes spin well. That turned out to matter quite a bit. Eala's game is built on heavy topspin, particularly from the forehand side. She learned a lot of what she knows at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, and that left-handed forehand hook she developed there is a genuine weapon on a surface that rewards spin. The high bounce from her forehand pushes opponents behind the baseline, making it hard for flatter, more powerful hitters like Valentova to find their rhythm. Rather than trying to overpower a player who hits harder than she does, Eala used the surface and her own shot shape to neutralize Valentova's advantages, extending rallies and forcing the Czech player to hit one more ball than she wanted to, over and over again, until the errors came. There was one point in the second set that immediately went viral on social media. Eala was pulled wide to her backhand side, nearly into the doubles alley, and sprinted to reach the ball. She slid on the hard court surface, which is not something you normally see on hard courts the way you see it on clay, and from what looked like an impossible position, she flicked a passing shot down the line that landed perfectly in the corner. The roar inside the stadium was so loud that it registered on local seismographic equipment. Some people have suggested that detail is exaggerated, but multiple sources in Doha confirmed it. The sound pressure in that moment was genuinely extraordinary. You can see it in the videos. The entire stadium erupted at once, a single collective explosion of noise, and it took nearly a minute for the atmosphere to settle enough for play to continue. What made the match work tactically was Eala's mental composure. 2 years ago, playing in an environment like that might have been too much for her. The pressure, the expectation, the emotional weight of representing an entire community in real time, all of that could have derailed her before she found her footing. Instead, she used it. She channeled the crowd's energy without being consumed by it. She stayed in points that looked lost. She defended on balls she had no business reaching. She made Valentova work for every point and made the stadium feel every rally. That is elite emotional intelligence in a sport where mental strength is often the deciding factor at the highest level. After the match ended and Eala had won, she took the microphone and spoke to the crowd in Tagalog. The place erupted again. She thanked the Filipino community for being there. She acknowledged the overseas workers specifically, the people who had spent money they didn't have in large amounts to buy tickets, who had taken time off from jobs that don't offer much flexibility, who had shown up because she was one of them and they needed to see her succeed. That moment, an athlete speaking her mother tongue to a crowd that understood every word in the middle of an international sporting event that usually operates entirely in English, was genuinely moving. It was the kind of connection between athlete and audience that transforms sport from entertainment into something more meaningful. That tether between Eala and her fans is what makes her comparable, at least in terms of cultural impact, to figures like Muhammad Ali or Manny Pacquiao. Both of them had extraordinary talent, obviously, but what made them icons wasn't just what they did in the ring, it was what they meant outside it. Ali represented something to Black Americans and to oppressed people globally during the Civil Rights era. Pacquiao represented Filipino pride and resilience on a world stage. Eala is starting to occupy a similar space in tennis, and the people who run this sport are only beginning to understand the implications of that. Meanwhile, Aryna Sabalenka was presumably somewhere in the same complex, processing what had just happened. She has won multiple Grand Slams. She has been world #1. By any objective measure of tennis achievement, she is the superior player right now. She has results that Eala cannot match, and may not match for years, if ever. And yet, the Qatar Open organizers chose someone else as their headline act, and the results justified that choice completely. That is a strange and uncomfortable reality for a player in Sabalenka's position. It's not a criticism of her. She can't help where she's from or the size of the community that shows up to support her, but it does force a very honest conversation about what star power actually means and who gets to have it. The tournament organizers made the correct business decision. Eala sells tickets in Qatar. Sabalenka doesn't, at least not in the same way. The Filipino community shows up in massive numbers and turns venues into home games. Other communities don't do that, or at least not with the same consistency and intensity. This isn't a statement about the relative quality of the players. It's a statement about the relationship between athletes and their audiences, and it exposes a serious gap in how the WTA has been thinking about marketing and scheduling for years. The WTA has traditionally used ranking and Grand Slam titles as the primary factors in deciding who gets promoted, who gets the primetime slots, who gets featured in posters and advertisements. That makes sense on one level, because those are the most visible and easily communicated measures of excellence in the sport, but they don't capture cultural connection, demographic passion, or the kind of organic fan mobilization that Eala generates everywhere in the world that has a Filipino community, which is essentially everywhere. A player can be ranked number 5 in the world and draw 30% capacity at a tournament, while a player ranked outside the top 100 sells out the same venue in minutes. The ranking system tells you one story, ticket sales tell you a completely different one. Tournament directors across the tour are now looking at what happened in Doha and rethinking their assumptions about scheduling. The conventional wisdom has been to put the biggest names by ranking in the prime time slots. That's what the model dictates. But Doha proved that the player with the most passionate fan base should sometimes get those slots regardless of ranking. That's a significant shift in thinking, and it has real financial implications. Events that generate atmosphere and sell out early rounds do more for a tournament's brand and get more media coverage. A sold-out Eala match in the first round does more for a tournament than a half-empty Sabalenka match in the same slot, even though Sabalenka is the objectively better player. There are also bigger implications here for the sport's global expansion. The WTA has spent years and considerable resources trying to grow its presence in China, with mixed results. The Southeast Asian market has largely been treated as secondary, something to develop over time rather than something to prioritize now. But the Filipino fan base is driven by pure, unmanufactured passion. There are no corporate incentives propping up the Filipino tennis fan community. Nobody's paying them to show up. They're there because they love the sport and they have a champion who looks like them and speaks their language. If Eala continues on this trajectory, and there's every reason to think she will, the WTA would be leaving enormous value on the table by not treating her as a primary global marketing asset.
For people watching from other parts of the world, what happened in Doha might look like a one-time novelty, a quirky story about passionate fans creating an unusual atmosphere. But it's actually pointing to a much deeper shift in the demographics of tennis. The sport has been dominated by European and American stars for generations. The money, the media attention, the sponsorship deals, all of it has followed those markets. But there are massive populations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America that have devoted tennis fan bases with nobody to rally behind. They've been waiting for someone who represents them. When that person arrives, they show up in ways that European and American fan bases, comfortable with decades of representation and success, simply don't. Eala is demonstrating that the untapped emotional energy in underrepresented markets can generate atmospheres and revenue that established stars from traditional tennis powerhouses cannot replicate. That should genuinely worry players who've gotten comfortable assuming their status is secure. Winning matches and accumulating rankings points is not the same thing as being irreplaceable. If you can't fill a stadium and another player can, the sport will reorganize itself around the player who can fill the stadium. That's not unfair. That's just how professional sports works. The audience's attention and enthusiasm is the product that gets sold, and the player who generates the most of it has leverage that pure results can't always provide. The pressure on Eala going forward is considerable. She's no longer playing in relative obscurity where a loss is just a loss. She's now the main event wherever she goes, and she has to manage that reality along with everything else that goes into competing at the highest level of professional tennis. Tournament organizers are already scrambling to schedule her matches strategically because they can't put her on a side court or slip her into a morning session that nobody attends. She dictates the schedule now instead of being dictated to by it. That is the definition of star power in professional sports, and she arrived at it in a way that has no real precedent in women's tennis. There's also a very real physical and emotional challenge that comes with winning a match like this. The adrenaline of playing in front of 7,000 screaming fans, winning a tight match against a player who had beaten her before, and then delivering a speech in Tagalog that had the crowd in tears. All of that takes an enormous amount out of a person. Young players often come out flat in the round after a massive emotional victory in front of a home-like crowd. The body and mind need time to recover, and the tournament doesn't pause to let that happen. Eala's team, the coaches and support staff around her, have to get her to eat properly, sleep, decompress, and refocus on the next opponent without losing the momentum and confidence that a win like this generates. The tournament is not won in the first round, no matter how loud the crowd was. The lasting image from the Qatar Open 2026, regardless of who eventually lifts the trophy at the end of the week, will be the contrast between the sold-out Eala match and the half-empty sessions happening elsewhere in the same complex at the same time. Empty seats at one end, a deafening wall of noise at the other. Players who have won Grand Slams and been ranked #1 playing to scattered applause, while a 20-year-old who has never won a WTA title sells out an international stadium for a first-round match. That contrast tells you everything you need to know about where tennis is, where it's going, and what the sport has been missing by not cultivating passionate fan bases in markets it has historically ignored. Sabalenka and the other top seeds have to be processing this reality in their own way. They are better players right now by any objective measure. Their results are superior, their experience is greater, their technical abilities are more developed, but they cannot generate what Eala generates. They cannot walk into a venue and transform it. They cannot make a stadium feel like a home match for thousands of people who traveled there specifically to see them win. That's a psychological challenge that has nothing to do with technique or tactics. It forces them to confront the uncomfortable reality that being the best player doesn't automatically make you the most important player. Those are two very different things, and for the first time in a long time, those two things are clearly attached to different people in women's tennis. The Filipino fans did something important in Doha. They reminded everyone watching that passionate, engaged fan bases are the foundation of professional sports. The most talented players in the world can fill a highlight reel without filling a stadium. What makes sport meaningful, what makes it worth watching and attending and caring about, is the human connection between athletes and the communities they represent. Eala has that in abundance. She has a fan base that follows her everywhere there's a Filipino community, which means she has a fan base that effectively follows her everywhere in the world. That is a competitive advantage that cannot be built through better training, smarter tactics, or harder work. It's cultural, it's demographic, and it's real. And it is making the entire tennis world reconsider what it thought it understood about star power, about marketing, and about who the sport actually belongs to. AlexEala sold out an entire stadium for a first-round match, while Grand Slam champions played to empty seats. The Qatar Open organizers chose her as their main attraction and were proven completely right. Star power isn't about rankings anymore. It never really was. It's about connection. And right now, nobody in women's tennis has more of it than AlexEala.